Alright, so now we did Kanto, we did Orange Islands, we did Generation 1, Generation 1.5, which is the Orange Islands. And now we're going to get into Generation 2, Johto. Pokemon Johto. Yeah, we are finally in Generation 2. So after this wildly successful, you know, you know, after a wildly successful first generation, Pokemon continues to grow its fan base. It continues to sell merchandise like card games, board games, all that jazz, toys. It continues to grow in popularity during this time period. But it also kind of loses its popularity during this time period as well. But beginning of Generation 2, Pokemon was still, the king of, children's anime. It was still considered the king of the gateway of anime. Pokemon was still on his high throne after being wildly successful in the late 90s. Now getting to the early 2000s, Pokemon, it's still, pretty big at this time period. In 2000 when Gold and Silver came out, it was a lot of hype going from Generation 1 to Generation 2. We got, a lot of great things happened during this time period with Generation 2. This was the first generation. We're going with the video games in particular. Generation 2 was the generation that fixed all the problems that Generation 1 had with his, game mechanics. Because Generation 1, you had a lot of Pokemon that were just simply too overpowered. Like you had Psychic types like were pretty much were pretty OP at this when Generation 1. During Generation 1, it was pretty OP. You had Pokemon like Alakazam, Slowbro, Mewtwo especially, which is were pretty much gods. People complain about Dragon types being overpowered, but Psychic types was just nearly impossible to beat unless if you were trying to take them down in one hit. Unless you had like a Dragonite, you were pretty much going to get crushed by a like an Alakazam or Mewtwo. It was just insane how powerful Psychic types were during that time period. And also during this time period, we got introduced to two new types, Dark types and Steel types, to help balance out the mechanics. So Dark types were super effective against Psychic types, and it completely nerfed Psychic types. So now Psychic types were no longer a threat. And then you had Steel types, which can pretty much resisted most typings. It resisted Psychic, it resisted normal, it resisted Dark, it resisted Ghost, it resisted Rock. I know Steel types were pretty bulky at this time. From Generation 2 to Generation 5, Steel types were pretty hard to take down unless you had a fire or fighting type. So Steel types were definitely the go-to types for defense around this time period. So with Generation 2 came out, it was pretty well received by the Pokemon fans. Pokemon was still had a huge fan base. Particularly in America, Pokemon was very big in America. Pokemon pretty much taking over kid culture in the United States. Being on movie screens, being on magazines, being on television, being on your Game Boy, being on your 64. Pokemon pretty much taking over, children's entertainment. By the time Generation 2 rolled around. The ratings were at an all-time high for kids WB at that time period. So it was a pretty fun time to be around if you were older Pokemon fan. So with Generation 2, you got introduced to two new types. You had Gold and Silver, which were the two main games for Generation 2. You had you didn't have really much spin-off games at this time. Generation 2 had the least amount of spin-off games. So you didn't really. So the only spin-off game that came out during this time period, I believe, was Pokemon Pinball. I think that's what it's called, and that was it. So you didn't have like oh yeah, Pokemon Stadium 2. You had Pokemon Stadium 2, and that was it. So you had Pokemon Stadium 2, Pokemon Pinball. That was about the only two spin-off games you had. Whereas other generations, you had like multiple spin-off games. You know, so like Generation 2 lacked the spin-off games. Generation 2 was also a generation which it was the only generation that was a direct sequel to another generation. So like to another generation. So like with Generation 1, with the Kanto region, you had this this little area called the Tojo Fall. So if you guys play Gold Silver or Heart Gold or Soul Silver, this was the area that gets you from Kanto to Johto, where you use Waterfall and use in one of those regions after you use Waterfall. So like that's another interesting thing. Like both regions were like connected to each other. So going silver, you had instead of having 8 gems like you do in every other generation, you had 16 gems to beat. So you had 8 gems for Johto, and you had 8 gems for Kanto. So like once you beat Johto, you go to Kanto, and after you beat Johto, you face yourself you face red from red and blue. You face your own self from back in the first generation. So that was pretty neat. It was a very cool time to be a Pokemon fan. It was, and from a video game perspective, from an anime perspective, it was gets a lot of Johto kind of gets a lot of flack for being a filler. And I kind of see why, because I did grow up in the Johto era, and there were a lot of filler episodes. There were a lot of filler episodes, but there was some meaningful episodes in Johto. I mean, Johto was a pretty fun generation. Like Ash, he had Kanto, he had all three. And Johto, it was the same deal, but with Johto, he only evolved one of his Pokemon. He never fully evolved any of his Pokemon. So like the only Pokemon he evolved in Kanto was Charmander, but he had a Charizard, which is the final evolution of Charmander. But in Generation 2, he only evolved one of his Pokemon, which was Chikorita, to a Bailey, but he didn't get a Meganium, so he didn't evolve his Cyndaquil nor Totodile. So Johto was kind of like the weakest. It was kind of when Ash was his weakest when it came to his starters, but and it was Pokemon roster from that specific generation. But being that Johto and Kanto's connected, he's gonna get a lot of his Kanto Pokemon back, from Professor Oak, because Professor Oak, still regularly appeared in the series during this time period. So he would get his Tauros back. He had Snorlax back. He used Charizard quite a bit during this time period. Right? Then he eventually gave it up during the episode of Master Quest or the Charge Pacific Valley. He also made some of his Kanto friends. A lot of his Kanto friends came back for the series, like Tracy, the dude, what's his name? Richie, the dude who had Pikachu, the dude he lost to in the Pokemon League. He came back. He also was he also actually earned his gym badges. So like in Kanto, one of the biggest problem with the Indigo League was that Ash didn't really earn his badges. Ash just he's got a badge from doing a good deed. So like the only badges he actually got from winning was what was it? He got was from Brock, which is the first gym leader, who is the main one of the main characters in this Pokemon series. You had he won the first gym. He won I think it was the third gym with when he faced Lieutenant Surge, and the seventh gym when he faced Blaine. So he only won. So out of all the 8 gym leaders, he only beat 3. He only beat 3 of them by actually battling, versus the other 4, which the other 5 he just straight up did a good deed and just got a badge. So with Brock, even with Brock is kind of a cheap win because he used the sprinklers to beat his Onyx. So like the first one, even though it kind of count, it doesn't really count. That's the one episode that gets a lot of hate from the Pokemon fan base. So yeah, so Gen 1 was pretty flawed in that sense when it comes to balancing game mechanics and the anime mechanics. Generation 2 did a little bit better with that. Especially consider the fact that you had more types than you did with Generation 1. But, it was still. But, being that Pokemon's a kid's show, you will have, some. You're bound to have some things that just don't go along in the game. But Generation 2 was a pretty cool generation. Ash did win a lot. Well, did from my memory, he did earn all his badges. Because my experience with Johto is that I watch Johto League, where it says "Born to be a winner." Johto, born to be a champion, born to be a winner, born to be the yeah. That's the one that got me hooked. And then I watched Master Quest, which was the last season of Johto. So I never watched the first season of Johto, which was Johto Journeys. I didn't watch that until later on. So I'm not really familiar with what he did in Johto Journeys. Other than the fact that, his Chikorita, when Ash first got Chikorita, he didn't really like Ash. Well, he was obsessed with Ash, but then, he kind of like got jealous of Pikachu, because Pikachu was, Ash's first Pokemon, and Chikorita, was like in love with Ash. But, Chikorita eventually, grew out of that. So, Generation 2 was a pretty, cool time. But around like 2001, 2002, Yu-Gi-Oh came out, and Yu-Gi-Oh, which is another big name anime, came around this time, and it kind of took away a lot of popularity from Pokemon. So like when Yu-Gi-Oh came out, Pokemon was known for being wasn't just known as an anime and a video game. It was also known as a card game. So like every kid like in my area had a deck of Pokemon cards. But when Yu-Gi-Oh came out, a lot of kids started playing Pokemon in exchange for Yu-Gi-Oh. And I know it's from experience because my cousin, he used to collect Pokemon cards, but now he stopped once Yu-Gi-Oh came out, and then from then on, I just saw kids play Yu-Gi-Oh cards instead of Pokemon cards. So this was around the time Pokemon started to lose its fan base, because around this time, during the early 2000s, you had Blade, you had Yu-Gi-Oh. You had, Digimon was still going strong at this time period. So the early 2000s, you had more variety. It was more diverse. People say, okay, Pokemon was cool when it first came out, but now I'm kind of getting tired of it. And then you had, a lot of the fans who started off with Red and Blue was getting older. So like a lot of fan base who were born like in the late 80s, a lot of them were like in middle school by the time Generation 2 was, came around. So a lot of them felt like they were too old for Pokemon. Pokemon was a kids' game. It's for like little kids and stuff like that. So a lot of them felt like they were too old for the series. So that's another thing that kind of hurt Pokemon long run. That's why Crystal lost its sales because of that notion. But Pokemon was still strong during this time period. But it wasn't until Generation 3 that's when Pokemon really had to, reestablish itself as a brand, because, Generation 2 was still, following up Generation 1 success. You had the two regions in one game. You still had Red and Blue. Red and Blue was in the game. You still had Professor Oak and Gary in the anime. Misty was still part of the crew, so Misty was been in the series for 5 seasons, from the Indigo League to Master Quest. So Pokemon was still, leaning on its previous success on what Generation 1. But Pokemon had to reestablish itself as a brand when it came to, once, Generation 2 ended. So that's why by the end of this generation, so I was doing around like early spring of 2003. That's when Generation 3 started to kick in. Ruby and Sapphire came out right in the middle, right when Pokemon was still airing Johto episodes. So Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire came out March of 2003, and I remember that. I remember during that time I was still I didn't hear Ruby and Sapphire too much later until like late 2003, but you know a lot of people was losing interest in Pokemon during that time period. So next, I'm gonna get into Generation 3 and the changes that happened over there. But Pokemon was still airing, Johto episodes. Pokemon didn't stop airing Johto episodes till like October that year. I remember that very well. I was 7 years old when, I remember 7 years old at that time. So I remember, pretty well, Pokemon was going through because I was like a huge Pokemon fan. Like Generation 2 made me a die-hard Pokemon fan. Like after like Master Quest, when like made me like a die-hard Pokemon fan. Like that's when I would really say, I'm a die-hard, Pokemon fan when it came to the anime. I still remember when, that transition from Generation 2 to Generation 3, during the end of the last episode, one of the last episodes of Generation 2, Ash fought, Ash in the Pokemon League, he fought this dude named, I think it was Harrison, I believe, and he had a Blaziken, and we was like, what the freak is a Blaziken? And Blaziken was, as you guys know, it's a Generation 3 starter, but we didn't really hear about Hoenn, all we knew, we didn't hear, unless you had played Ruby and Sapphire, you didn't know what a Blaziken was, because again, I was a little kid at the time, but I still remember watching that episode, I was in second grade, and I was like, dang, that mug is powerful, he beat his Charizard, and Charizard is a fire flying type, and Blaziken is a fire fighting type. So, you would have thought, Ash would have won that battle, but Ash lost, and it ended up, Ash lost. So, next time I'm going to discuss the Hoenn region, Generation 3, but Generation 2 overall was like, it was a cool time to be a Pokemon fan. I'm glad I got introduced to Pokemon when it's still in its heyday. I kind of glad I introduced Pokemon when it was still relevant to, to a vast majority of young kids, because nowadays Pokemon, it is still popular among kids, but it's not as it was during the first two generations, But it was still pretty discussed in lunch tables, and parks and school grounds. It was still pretty much discussed, in those areas. But when Generation 3 came around, Pokemon really had to reestablish itself. It really had to reinvent itself, because with the changes that was going on during this time period, a lot of kids was getting Game Boy Advances. The Game Boy Color was becoming outdated. So till next time, Generation 3 up next. Thank you for watching, and I'm signing out.